Welcome to the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast, the place where teachers from around the world meet to share innovative ideas about music education. Listen and learn as we help you motivate your students, grow your income, expand your studio, and become a more creative piano teacher.
G'day everyone and welcome back to the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast. You're listening to episode number 102. And if you're one of my Inner Circle piano teaching community members, a special welcome to you. My name is Tim Topham, your host for the show, and if this is your first time here, thank you so much for tuning in. I definitely recommend that you subscribe because we've got lots of awesome content coming up as we finish Composition Month and move into group teaching focus for September. The Creative Piano Teaching Podcast is, of course, the place where you can get weekly inspiration, ideas, business, and teaching strategies to help support your teaching and grow your studio. Remember that the best place to listen to podcasts like this is on your phone or tablet as you drive, cook, exercise, or walk the dog. So if you're watching this while staring at a screen on your computer, I'd encourage you to reconsider a good way to listen to these, which is on the go. Just use the podcast app on your phone, search for Creative Piano, and click subscribe. You'll automatically be notified when new episodes go live. And thanks to everyone who has left reviews on Facebook and iTunes recently. I really appreciate all your feedback and the time you've spent to make and create those. Find out how you too can support the work I'm doing by leaving a review. You can find out how to do that at timtopham.com/review. Today's show notes and a full transcript are now available at timtopham.com/episode 102. Now, just before we dive into this week's episode, I want to take this opportunity to let you know that the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast is brought to you by the Inner Circle, the world's leading professional development and training community for piano teachers. Inner Circle members get access to an extensive library of courses, teaching videos, lesson plans and downloads that cover everything you need to know, not only to teach piano creatively and inspire students of all ages and abilities, but also to support you in building and growing your studio. On top of that, you also get access to our monthly online masterminds, exclusive member discounts on products and software and sheet music, plus our active community forums where you not only get advice and input from me, but also from hundreds of fellow piano teachers from around the world and my handpicked team of experts ready to help you whenever you need it. So if you're serious about expanding your teaching repertoire, learning the best strategies to motivate and inspire students while growing a thriving studio, the Inner Circle is the place to be. You can find out more about it at timtopham.com/community. And remember that you, as a podcast listener, can use the code PIANOPODCAST to take $100 off an annual subscription locked in for the life of your membership. I look forward to seeing you there. Let's get stuck into today's episode. It's all about modes, and I've decided to create an episode on modes because I know that there's a lot of confusion around modes. People really not sure what they are, how to work out if a piece of music's in a mode, what relevance they have to teaching, if they should introduce them to their students, how they should do that, all of those kinds of questions. So that's what we're getting stuck into today. And you're going to love today's freebie download that I've created for you. It's my modes worksheet. It's just 2 pages ready to pop on your piano bench or next to your piano for teaching. And I actually have this on my piano all the time with my circle of fifths. And I use both, as you probably know, quite regularly. The modes worksheet, of course, is going to be a great way for you to quickly reference if a piece of music's in a particular mode or what notes are in a mode and how they sound and what they can do and those kinds of things. So grab that whenever you've got a chance. You can head to timtopham.com/episode 102. That's the show notes page. And you'll be able to scroll down and find the download link for the piano modes worksheet. I really hope that's helpful for you. And I'm going to be referencing it a few times in today's episode. I've actually really enjoyed digging into modes in preparation for this episode. As you probably realize, I put a fair bit of thought into all my podcasts, and I like to see this as a little mini free training for you. And so hopefully today's episode is no exception to that. And I posted on Facebook in a couple of groups and on my own page about questions that people had about modes. And there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of great ideas that came out too. So it's obviously a topic of interest. Now, I do want to preempt this whole episode with the fact that I am not a musicologist or specialist in modes or scale series or patterns or anything to do with the technical side of scales. I'm not a specialist in it. I'm just a piano teacher who has got some ideas about it and will be sharing these in this episode. So if you have a different approach to the way you teach modes, or you've studied it all your life and you realize that I've got some inconsistencies or whatever it is, totally fine. I put my hand up and say right from the beginning, I'm not a specialist in this. But hopefully what I give you today is practical, useful advice that you can use in your studio, because that's what my whole website is about, right? Helping you with practical advice you can use straight away. So I'm going to try and cut through all the confusion and just give you what you need to know. We'll be talking through 6 different sections today. First one is what are modes? A little bit of an introduction that's not too long, and some confusing stuff to ignore. Which is going to be talked about in that section. In part 2, I'm going to go through the modes, so some characteristics and examples of them. Section 3 is all about how to work out if music you're playing is in a mode and what mode that is. Section 4 is how to use modes in your teaching. Section 5 is most popular questions from readers and listeners, and I've actually distilled them down to very few because there was all the questions really were very similar. And finally, in section 5 of this podcast, I'm going to be talking about resources. So compositions that are written in modes, music to explore, and some of those great links. And all those links to the music that I suggest will all be on the show notes page, of course, at timtopham.com/episode 102. All right, so let's get into section 1. What are modes? Well, a mode is just a series of notes like a scale. A mode is a specific sequence of whole steps and half steps, or tones and semitones if you're here in Australia or the United Kingdom. Historically, the term mode and not scale was used for all of these kinds of note sequences going back to the ancient Greeks. Over time, the term for 2 particular modes, Ionian and Aeolian, came to be called scales. And today we call the Ionian mode the major scale and the Aeolian mode the minor scale, or more specifically the natural minor scale. The term mode is still used for the other note sequences. So both mode and scale are simply a sequence of 8 notes with the intervals between 2 successive notes varying in distance from 1 step, a whole step, or a half step. Now, there's lots of history around church modes and how they relate to Gregorian chant and all that kind of stuff. But look, to be honest, I don't really have all the detail about the history, and to me, it's not 100% relevant to what I'm doing with my students anyway. But if you're interested in that, I'm sure you'll be able to find lots of information about it online and how these modes have developed out of church modes or Gregorian chant and those sorts of things. Today, there are 7 commonly recognized musical modes, each with a different sequence of notes, whole and half steps, as we've said, and each with a characteristic note and sound as well. As my good friend Forrest Kinney says, Lydian is more spring-like than major, while Phrygian is more wintry than minor. Dorian has a sweet, hopeful, melancholic nature that minor doesn't know, while Mixolydian has a sassiness that a major key wouldn't dare expose. What a poet Forrest Kinney is. Many of you will be aware of Forrest's fantastic creative work, and you can find him online. And the great news is that he's actually appearing on our podcast here in 2 weeks' time. So do stay tuned for that. That's going to be episode number 104. While modes may be demonstrated and explored by starting on specific white notes of the keyboard and playing only white notes until you get to the same note an octave higher, in my opinion, it's actually better to consider how the notes of the scales are related to the major and minor scales that they're built on. And we'll get to more of that later. Modes are not that typical in most Western music, although they're quite common in folk tunes. Dorian and Mixolydian are definitely the most common, and we'll talk about what that actually means in the next section. Now, I just want to cover some confusing things that you can probably ignore. So just back to this white note thing. I'm not such a fan of talking about Dorian is the white notes from D to D and Phrygians from E to E and all that kind of stuff on the keyboard. That is true. However, I tend to think of the various modes as being related to some changes. So they're changed from the major scale or changed from the natural minor scale. So, for example, Dorian has a flattened 3rd and a flattened 7th note. So you could either consider playing any major scale. So we could play G major scale. And if you flatten the 3rd and the 7th note, you'll get G Dorian. That's the easy way for me to think about it. However, Dorian, given that it's got that flat third, you might want to think of it as a natural minor scale with a raised sixth note. So on the piano modes worksheet that I've given you to print out, you can actually see on the front page, I give the name of the modes, the notation as it looks on white notes, and the notation in C. And also on that, I give the alterations of the major scale. So Phrygian would be a major scale with a flat 2, 3, 6, and 7. That's all you have to remember. Lydian is a major scale with a sharp 4, and so forth. And we'll go into a little bit more detail of that later. Now, again, the purists and people who take a different approach to this might well say that the Phrygian scale, it's got a flat 2, 3, 6, and 7, is actually a natural minor scale with a flat 2, because a natural minor scale already has flat 3, 6, and 7. Okay, so there's two ways to think about it. I think it's up to you 100% which way you want to go, and I've included both on the worksheet for you to download, so you can decide which approach you would like. Another confusing thing you might have seen around is talk of things like hyperlydian or Lydian dominant and various other permutations and combinations of modes speak. I'm not going to cover any of that because I just don't understand it and I haven't got time to learn it, and I don't think it's all that relevant to most teachers today. So we're just going to keep it nice and simple and practical. One other point of nomenclature is that sometimes jazz musicians might refer to a mode as being part of a different scale set. So my good friend Bradley Sowash, when we were talking about this, says that, for example, the jazz altered dominant scale, which would be A, B flat, C sharp, D, E, F, G, A, can be described as the fifth mode of the D harmonic scale, right? Now, again, for me, too confusing. I'm not going to worry about it, but I do want to mention and just reiterate again that there's far more depth to this topic that you could research if you want to, but for me, we're just going to keep it nice and simple today, and for you, hopefully, to make sure it's usable in your studio. Okay, so my next question is, who cares about modes anyway? What is the point of worrying about it? Well, I think first and foremost, students will come across music that is written in a mode, and they should have a grasp of how it works and what that actually means. Also, teachers will often need to help students with their, we call them general knowledge, for assessments and exams. That's where the examiner can ask them, what key is this in, or what's the form of this piece? And we need to know as teachers that just because a piece of music has a key signature at the start, if it begins and ends on a different note that's not the major and minor related to that key signature, and it just doesn't seem to fit the key, it may well be in a mode, and we need to know what that is and how to work it out. Modes are used for creativity and improvising. And if you want to get creative with a piece of music in a mode, you, one, need to know it's in a mode, and two, you need to know what notes are available for improvising with. So, for example, if a piece of music has A as the tonic and a whole lot of A minor, D, and G chords with clearly no E7 and a sharp G, then the music's probably in A Dorian, and that gives you some knowledge about how you could get a little bit creative with it. Now, I've been actually exploring this concept in the new AMEB Piano for Leisure Series 4 books, which over here in Australia are some of our exam board books, with regard to my performance notes. And these are the notes that I've included on every piece with some teaching strategies and ways that you can get creative about that piece with your student. And so part of the reason for this podcast was because as part of that work, I needed to get my own head around modes for the purposes of writing and editing those books. And so I had to dig deeply and make sure that I knew what I was talking about when it came to saying, well, this piece is actually in E Phrygian, and here are the notes that you can use to improvise with it. And look, modes are great to explore if you want new moods or sounds, and perhaps you're working with your students on improvising and they've done a fair bit in major and minor and perhaps the pentatonic scale, and maybe they can improv in the blues scale. Maybe the next thing you can do is to start getting a bit more creative with some modes. And as the students' creativity develops, they can learn more and more. So that's just another take on, again, why I think understanding modes is relevant to teachers. All right, so now let's go through each of the modes, and I'm going to be referring to my worksheet here. So if you have that handy and you're not cooking or walking the dog or whatever it is, feel free to grab it out and you can explore it with me. Now, the first mode is the Ionian mode. Now, this is simply the major scale. So I'm not actually going to talk about that at all because I think we all know the major scale, how it sounds, and pieces of music in that mode. So let's move straight on to Dorian. As I said before, you can think of Dorian in two ways. You could think of it as a major scale with a flattened third and seventh note, or you can think of it as a natural minor scale with a raised sixth note. Either way, if I'm playing in C major, I'm going to be playing C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, F, G, A, B flat, and C. Here's how a Dorian sounds in C. There's a number of pieces that you'll recognise probably that are in this mode. Scarborough Fair is one of the more popular ones. What Shall We Do with the Drunken Sailor is another one of them. And it tends to work really well over minor seventh chords. And so a little chord progression or a couple of chords that you could use. Let's work in D Dorian. That's all the white notes. And in my left hand, I'm just going to explore D minor and G chords while I improvise a little bit on D Dorian. So I'm using the white notes now from D to D. Have a listen. So those chords in my left hand were just simply a D minor in root position and a G chord in second inversion. Nice and easy for any student pretty much to play. And you can hear it's got that kind of sense of lift as per the Drunken Sailor, I think of it. And Daniel McFarlane in podcast episode 1 was talking about it having a nautical kind of feel to it. That characteristic note, of course, is the raised sixth. So if you're thinking about it from the natural minor scale, it's a natural minor scale with a raised sixth, and that's kind of the key, the characteristic note of the Dorian mode. All right, let's move on. Phrygian now. So Phrygian is a natural minor scale with a flattened second note. And so if you're just thinking from major scale, you're going to be flattening the second, third, sixth, and seventh notes. So let me play a Phrygian mode in the key of C. So I'm playing the notes C, D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, and C. And again, I've got the worksheet in front of me, so this is nice and easy. So make sure you grab that download. It's got a little bit of a kind of Spanish sound, and I use this to effect in my No Book Beginners course. And you can find out more about that at timtopham.com/beginners if that's of interest to you. My No Book Beginners course is a creative way of starting beginner students without any reading or method books for up to about 10 weeks. And one of the improv activities that I do in there is an around the world improv. And so I used this Phrygian mode for improvising in that course. So I used just the first 5 notes. If I had some chords like that, you can obviously hear that Spanishy kind of influence really, really clearly. Interestingly enough, for the Egyptian part of that around the world improv, I used a harmonic minor scale. And for an Asian kind of feel, I used pentatonic. And always fun, an alien sound. Do you know what kind of scale to use for an alien sound on the piano? It's this one. Tell me what it is. Do you know what that scale is? Yes, that's the whole tone scale. Great fun, C, D, E, and then G flat, A flat, B flat. Good fun to play. All right, so that's the Phrygian mode. Flat 2, 3, 6, and 7 from the major scale. That's how you might like to think of it. All right, now the next one is the Lydian. And the characteristic note of the Lydian scale is a sharp 4. So to play a Lydian scale, all you need to do is play a major scale and raise the 4th note by a semitone. Here's how it sounds again in C. So the notes I was playing there, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. And explore these at home in your own time. I think you'll really enjoy working with these. So the Lydian scale has a kind of uplifting, a little bit quirky sound. It's used in the Simpsons theme. It's actually a Lydian dominant, so I'm told. What that means or how to work it out, I'm, again, not sure. I'd have to research it, so don't worry about it. But just know that bum, 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 ba-dum is very much a Lydian characteristic and adds to that quirkiness. Actually, I think the Lydian dominant has a B flat in it as well from memory. But again, go easy on me, musicologists who are out there listening. So it's got that kind of uplifting sound. And there's a great piece by my good friend here in Australia, Elisa Milne, called Gold Rush. It's in our grade 2 Australian examination series over here. It's in a Lydian mode. So C major with an F sharp, that raised 4th, of course, sounding very cool. Let me just see if I've got it here on the piano. Yeah, here's a little bit of Gold Rush by Elisa Milne. As always with Elisa, beautifully written, great pedagogical music. If you're interested in her books, they're called Little Peppers, and highly recommended for all kind of students. Sorry, Elisa, if you're listening to my botched rhythm right at the start there, but you get the idea of that sound. It's kind of quirky, it's kind of fun and uplifting. So that's the Lydian mode, just a major scale with a sharpened 4th note. The next scale is Mixolydian. So all you have to do to create a Mixolydian mode is lower the 7th note of a major scale. That's just one note different, nice and easy. And that flattened 7th note is really the characteristic note of this scale. And so it tends to work quite well over dominant 7th chords. Used to be one that certainly the Beatles tended to use a fair bit in their work. So here's how it sounds, Mixolydian. I'll play it again in C. So I'm going to play a C scale with a B flat. And you could improvise over a few simple chords. I'm going to try playing this in G, because that's just white notes, G to G on the piano. And I'll try G, F, E minor, and F chords in my left hand. Let's see if this works. By the way, these little chord progressions that I'm exploring over these modes are all written on the worksheet. So on the back side of the worksheet, the table's divided into 5 columns. We've got 6, the name of the mode, songs that use it, changes from the major scale, changes from the natural minor scale, the sound or mood that it conveys, and in the final column, chord progressions to improvise over. So let me see if this works. I'm going to play around with G Mixolydian. You get the idea. Very simple. All I was playing was G and F chords and an E minor thrown in there. So it's quite a bright sound, a little bit edgy, and it's kind of pop sounding too. A fair bit of pop music's written with this kind of lowered 7th note these days. So that's the Mixolydian mode. Now, the next mode in the scale, in the set is Aeolian. Now, Aeolian is simply your natural minor scale. And as I tell anyone who comes to workshops in the last year or so, I recommend highly teaching natural minor scales before you teach harmonic minor scales. Why? Because the natural minor, of course, is exactly the same set of notes as the relative major. So it makes the connection for students between key signatures and sharps and flats in a key much more understandable. And it allows you to do great improvising because it's a really cool sounding scale. So here's the Aeolian scale. I'm just going to play C, Aeolian. So that would be the notes C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, and C. Here's how it sounds. Versus, of course, the harmonic minor with the raised seventh, which sounds like this. So the natural minor, I'm not going to talk too much about that because I think most people are familiar with that sound. And again, make sure your students, if they're learning minor and major scales, get them to learn the natural minor first and be really confident with it. It should be easier because, again, if they know the notes for G major, they already know the notes for E natural minor because they're the same. All right, so it's a good little trick for you. Now, finally, we get on to everyone's favorite, Locrian, or Locrian, depending on how you want to say it. The Locrian mode is the only modern diatonic mode in which the tonic chord is a diminished chord, resulting in a tonic chord that is considered dissonant. So, for example, the tonic chord of B Locrian is B, D, and F, and the interval between the tonic B and the dominant F is a diminished fifth, which is why it's a little bit controversial. Let me play you a Locrian scale in the key of C. So, in order to play this, I'm going to play C, D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, C. So this is a major scale with a flattened 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. Here's how it sounds. It's actually really quite fun to play because it's a little bit like B major to play because you've got the 2 flat notes and the 3 flat notes in patterns, but you're playing the C and the F instead of the B and the E. So explore it. It's quite fun, as I say, quite fun to play, much harder to explore improvising with. And it's also quite hard to find examples of music written in this because it's actually quite hard to write in this mode and stay in it. So most music will tend to perhaps have elements of Locrian in it without staying in it too long because it's not the most pleasant way to write music. As my good friend Bradley Sowash said the other day, the Locrian's just plain messed up and hardly ever used. And he's a jazz musician. So it's the kind of tells you that you probably don't need to worry. Sorry, Bradley, if you didn't want me to say that, because I know you're probably listening. I don't really use the Locrian mode or explore it with students. I haven't yet found a piece of music that I've needed to work out that it is in Locrian mode. So to be honest, I don't think you need to worry about it. So really all you need to learn about that might be new, if we take out the Ionian and the Aeolian, the natural minor and the major, then really all you've got is Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. That's only 4 modes that you should probably get used to and get comfortable playing and exploring. The other ones, you don't need to worry about too much. Okay, so part 2 is how to work out if music you're playing is in a mode, and I get asked this by teachers a fair bit. So the first thing to look at is the key and the notes in the key, in the piece of music, sorry. If they don't kind of correlate too well, then chances are you might be in a mode, and this is without even playing and listening to the music, of course. What you'll find is that if the key of a piece of music looks like a D major key signature, so F sharp and C sharp, and yet it doesn't start and end on D or D chords or its relative minor, B minor, then maybe it starts on an E or something like that. Chances are you're using some kind of mode. And there's a couple of ways to work out which mode that is. Now, also, I think it's a great idea to use sound too. And if we go from kind of brightest sounding to darkest, although this is up to subjective listening, of course, we're probably thinking from brightest Lydian, Ionian, Mixolydian to getting darker Dorian, Aeolian, Phrygian, and Locrian. So often the sound of it would definitely tell you that something's a bit funny. It's like, oh, I was expecting an F sharp there in that G major piece and there isn't one. That's kind of weird. I wonder what that means. And then you can dig a little bit deeper. Interestingly enough, I worked out a trick only recently about how you can actually work this out. Now, I don't particularly like tricks in music, so I'd use this as a test to see if you're right. So here's how it works. What you need to know is the order of modes in order. So it's Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. IDPLMAL. And you know how much I love mnemonics. I was researching a little bit of this and found some people talking about mnemonics of these. So I thought these were kind of funny. I don't particularly like middle-aged ladies was one that somebody said. And it's a little bit ageist, of course. And another one was, I don't play loud music at lessons. Now, again, I'm not too worried about, there's no reason I can see why students would need to learn these. I just thought they were funny. So don't go and suddenly start feeling you've got to teach all your students mnemonics of the order of modes, please, whatever you do. Again, I'm using this as a test. So we've got the order though. So then step 2, work out the major key according to the key signature. So if it's a G major key signature, so it's got an F sharp, we're talking about G. Step 3, work out the tonic note of the piece. So if the key signature is G, it seems to be G major with an F sharp, and the first note is A, then all you need to do is count the interval from the major tonic key to the tonic note of the piece and move that many places along the order of modes. So here's an example. We've got a piece of music written with a G major key signature, but the first note is A. So between G and A, I'm moving one place along. That means I start with Ionian, I move one place along in my list of modes, and I end up on Dorian. This piece is in A Dorian. Here's another example. I see a D major key signature, D major, so C sharp and F sharp. But the first note is G. So I'm going to count between D and G upwards, D, E, F, G, that's 4. And I'm going to move along my order of modes. Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, that's 4 along. This piece of music is in G Lydian. So here's a couple of examples of actual pieces of music written in modes. And interestingly enough, these 3 all feature in the next Piano for Leisure series here in Australia. So my first example is one called Seabird by my good friend Christopher Norton. Looks like it's in C major, but it starts on D. So what key is this one in? Don't have time to play the whole piece, of course. So there's no key signature, but clearly centered around D. What was the mode? Well, we've moved 1 along the list. We're in D Dorian. The other way to check this, of course, is to look through the music and go, well, it seems to be centered around D, but there's no F sharp or C sharp. And those 2 notes are the 3rd and the 7th. It seems to have a flattened 3rd and a flattened 7th. What mode has a flattened 3rd and 7th? Dorian. Let's do that check and we can check the order. All right, here's another one from the books. This one is called, in fact, you'll know this one. I'm not even going to tell you the name of it. The key signature is D, but it starts on an E. Have a listen to it, and I'm going to ask you, what mode is this and what's the name of the piece? Okay, so did you work out what mode this was in, or what's the name of the piece? We should be doing like a quiz show here. So this was Mad World. Key signature of D, but starts on an E. So this is in E Dorian. All right, and one more example. This is a piece of music called Jazz Train by Wynne and Rossi. And this has the key signature of C, but definitely starts in a G position. So have a listen to this and see if you can work out what mode this one's probably in. All right, you get the idea. Great fun little piece, that one, called Jazz Train. It's in the key of C, starts in a G position. So that one is in G Mixolydian. We've gone up C, D, E, F, G. We've gone up 5 positions in our order. So we're in Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian. So that's written in a major scale position with no sharp 7. So a flattened 7th, in other words. And that one's in G, so that would be, I should be expecting mostly white notes and no F sharp. So there you go. I hope that has helped you to work out if the music you're playing is in a mode. The best way to do this is to explore music and find the answers yourself. See if you can work out these modes without sort of jumping on Google, either using your ears or the changed notes in the actual piece of music. Like I said, it seems to be in D major, but there's no F sharp or C sharp. What does that mean? And then finally, you could use this trick that I've taught you about the order. Don't worry about those mnemonics, please, though. All right, so let's get to the juice of now using this in your teaching. You've got a few options here, depending on how you want to approach this. You could add modes to students' scale practice. So you could start on the white notes, and just like adding pentatonic and blues scales as they're exploring those creative activities around 12-bar blues or some chordal composing with some simple pentatonic melodies over the top, these give them more options to explore. Interestingly enough, some exam boards are starting to use these too now and introduce them. Rock School and ANSCA, which is our Australian New Zealand exam board here, both are exploring modes with students, which is great. Now, the other thing you could do is play scales in the right hand, so modal scales with students, and just some left-hand chords. And that's why I wanted to include the chord progressions that work with these modes in the freebie download. Again, you can get that at timtopham.com/episode 102. So if a student's exploring A Aeolian, they could use A minor and G chords in the left hand, or they could just use fifths. Let me play around with A Aeolian. So that's white notes on A, and I'll just use fifths in my left hand, moving around between A and G positions. Okay, again, very simple. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Your students and you, I'm sure, could make things much more interesting, but you get the idea. Another way, an important part of using this in your teaching is to get used to them yourself. So you could potentially learn a new pattern each week in all forms, just like for an exam. I've been working on my mode playing two hands together. Interestingly, you've got to change fingering, particularly for things like C Lydian with that F sharp. So you'll have some new fingerings to learn. You could play these, hands together, hands separately, contrary motion, all those kinds of things. Just get used to them. If you've been playing piano for a long time, then why don't you just forget playing scales for a while, if you were playing them at all? I struggle to myself. And just explore modes for a month. New one every few days, and you'll soon have the idea of them. Another way you can use this in your teaching is getting students to create with them. So as I mentioned before, my notebook beginners have this around the world improv idea, giving a student a little motive and then asking them to create something, often using pedal, simple fifths in the left hand, and notes from the modes. And again, you could start on the white notes if that's easier for your student, and then move to helping them understand how to create the modes in any key. I got a comment from Elizabeth Davis on Facebook. She says, I love teaching modes. I use common folk tunes like those mentioned in some earlier posts, but also have students do social media profiles for the modes to learn their names and differences. Some even come up with unique names for the modes and even a profile picture. So Lydian becomes a picture of a person called Lydia. She has a lot of fun with it. I thought that was a kind of cool little trick. Look, it's only limited, of course, by your creativity, what you do with these. I think the last thing I would say is to, anytime you find a piece of music in a mode that you're teaching a student or they're learning somehow, then see if you can get creative with it. Pull it apart a little bit. And the simplest way to do that, as I've said before in either training or podcasts, I can't remember, is to keep the left hand the same and noodle around in the mode with the right hand. So if I go back to that Christopher Norton example, if I just play the left hand as he wrote it originally and just muck around a little bit with the right hand, you'll get the idea. Let me show you. It's one of the things that I have really put some time and effort into in this series of books that I've been producing for the AMEB, and that's to come up with little creative ideas like that for pieces of music. But you can do this yourself. So I want to challenge you, anytime you're teaching a student now a piece of music in a mode, try out that idea of, one, getting them to learn the mode as a scale, and two, getting them to noodle around in the key of the mode while they keep the left hand for the piece of music the same. All right, we're coming up to the end of the episode today. So one of the biggest questions that I got asked from Facebook when I popped out the question, I'm going to be doing a podcast on modes, what do you need help with? The kinds of questions that I got the most were like this one from Christina, who said, at what level do you begin introducing modes? And Felicity, similar question, how do you introduce the concept and at what level? When do you discuss it and in relation to what? Is it in the context of a piece the student's learning or a crash course in all of them at a certain point? So if you've been listening to me for a little while, you'll probably guess my thinking on the crash course in all of them at a certain point. I wouldn't be approaching it in that way because, again, I'm always trying to find relevance for the student. A student isn't going to, unless they're quite advanced and really enjoying music theory and scales and technical work, they're probably not really going to enjoy suddenly having to learn another 5 different scale patterns. So I think it's much more relevant to discuss it and explore it in relation to pieces of music that they're learning. And in this last part of the podcast, I'm about to tell you where you can find a whole lot of music in modes if you would like to explore this with students. As to Christina's question, at what level do you begin introducing modes? Well, again, it's up to you and the level of competence of your student and their interest in it. I think most times, there's certainly beginner pieces of music that include an exploration of modes. And I'm thinking in particular, there's a series over here called P-Plate Piano, again by the fantastic Elisa Milne. And a lot of music in that has modal context. And so if your student is old enough to understand and explore it, then that's the time I would do it. Again, in answer to this question, I would say at what level? Well, at a level appropriate to your student, but in relation to something that they're learning. So if it's a little bit of composing that you'd like to do and you'd like to explore a mode with them, then great. You could perhaps use the first 5 notes of the Phrygian mode and do some kind of little Spanish improv. So that was these notes. Could a student relatively early on, rather than or alongside doing some blues improvisation, maybe they could do a little Spanish, in inverted commas, improvisation using one of the modes or a different mode, whatever it is. So again, up to your student. Just try and find ways to relate it to the other work that you're doing. So music that they're learning, a pop piece that they've heard on the radio, music that they think sounds cool. Why does it sound cool? Well, actually, it's in a Mixolydian mode. Let's explore that. Those are the kinds of connections that I love making with students. Now, there's obviously there were other questions, but I'm conscious of keeping these podcasts to around 45 minutes if I possibly can. So if you do have other questions, then of course, ask away. I'll do my best to answer them. I'm sure there's other people who are probably imminently more qualified to answer them than me, but I will certainly do my best to make it a practical answer as much as I can rather than a theoretical answer. So let's move on to the last section of today's podcast, which is talking about resources, books and music that you might like to explore with your students. So here is a list of people who have written books about modes and including pieces in all the different modes. And the first one that comes to mind is Daniel McFarlane at supersonicspiano.com. I can't remember the title of his series, but he definitely has pieces of music written in every single mode, including, I believe, Locrian. He did try to do that. I think he's joked about how hard it was at times, but if you'd like to explore a piece of music written solely in Locrian mode as much as he could, then you could check out his work at supersonicspiano.com. By the way, we'll put links to all of these resources that I'm about to tell you about in the show notes alongside your piano worksheet download. Robert Vandal has created 2 great books about modes. There is an easier one, which is called Modal Expressions, and there's a slightly harder one called Modes and Moods, both worth checking out on Amazon or Sheet Music Plus. There's a funny little download, quirky little download called Emoji Modes from Anne Crosby Gaudet, I think her name is probably pronounced Gaudet. And you can find out her and download her resource at musicdiscoveries.ca. And you'll be able to find it on there. As I say, a fun little download, connecting modes to emojis. I thought that's kind of cool. And some things there for both teachers and students to explore. Music Moves for Piano by Marilyn Lowe features a pattern vocabulary for tonal patterns, rhythmic patterns, based on the language of music learning theory. And so a number of the songs that students sing, the patterns they learn in that, are based on modes. So if you're interested in that approach, then you could certainly do some more research about music learning theory. If you Googled that, you'll be able to find both some of my podcasts. When I've interviewed a number of people, we had a focus on that last year on the blog and podcast. We had a focus month on music learning theory, so check that out. Or you could Google Music Moves for Piano, and I'm sure you'll be able to find out where to grab Marilyn's books. Willard A. Palmer has a book called Fun with Modes, a little bit of an older book, but again, a whole lot of different pieces written in modes. Forrest Kinney, who I mentioned earlier, his Pattern Play series of books, which are all about improvising with little pattern ideas at the piano, definitely features some modal ideas, pentatonic ideas, all sorts of things like that. You can Google Pattern Play or go to the show notes and grab the link for that. Lisa Donovan Lucas, who is published over at Piano Pronto, has some duets in modes, which I thought would be kind of fun to explore. Her book is called Duets a la Mode, and you can find that over at pianopronto.com. Margaret Brandman, an Australian composer over here, has a book called Contemporary Modal Pieces, another one worth trying. And Rami Bar-Niv has his Toccata in Phrygian mode, and we'll put a YouTube link to that. It's pretty exciting. And another person I'll just finish with is Deborah Wanless, who has written several books of music that are purely in modes and explains what they are and how to improvise with them. It's really kind of step by step. I really like the approach that she's used here, and they're perfect for little kids improvising and at sort of that elementary level. You can find out about her series, In the Mood for Modes, book 1. There's definitely book 2. I'm not sure how many more there are. In the Mood for Modes, you can find that at Deborah Wanless, DebraWanless.com, and you'll be able to find out more about her resource for teaching and exploring modes. So I really hope you've enjoyed today's episode and it's been helpful to you in your studio. Make sure you do leave a comment on the show notes page if you've got any questions or you need more information or anything like that, or just to tell me whether you liked it or not. Make sure, of course, you get your freebie download. It's my 2-page piano modes worksheet. It's a thing I've been using through this podcast and use each day. It's up on my piano with the circle of fifths. Really, really handy reference. And you can grab that, of course, at timtopham.com/episode 102. That's also where you'll find the show notes and links to all those books and resources that I mentioned. So you can go there and just with one click go and buy whatever you'd like. A quick reminder too that you can now subscribe to updates from me about my podcast and blog on Facebook Messenger. If that's of interest, it's a pretty handy way to get notified when I've released a new article or podcast. You can head to timtopham.com/Facebook, and there I've got the link. It's a one-click link, and you'll literally be able to access all my podcasts and download straight into your Facebook Messenger. Next week, we're getting started with our group teaching work, and it's all about group teaching with one of the pioneers of group teaching, Mayron Cole. Many of you, if you've taught group piano, will have heard of the Mayron Cole method. She has a substantial website. She's been teaching groups for about 40 years, back when nobody was teaching groups, and I was very lucky to have this conversation with her that I will enjoy sharing with you same time next week. Thank you very much for joining me today. Again, if you do have time to leave a review, you can find out about how to do that at timtopham.com/review. Until then, enjoy your teaching.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast. We'd love to help take your teaching to the next level as a member of our supportive community. Use the coupon Piano Podcast for $100 off an annual membership of Tim's Inner Circle today. To find out more, head to timtopham.com/community.